Well, hello everybody and welcome to another Sunday here in my office. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but over the past few months there has been sort of like a routine, if you like, of location videos on Wednesday and office videos on a Sunday. And that really is, it's just to give me that work-life balance, and it's working well. So pretty much you can expect that for the foreseeable future, most of the time anyway. But in today's video, I want to expand on my last video, and if you haven't seen my last video, I'll put a link just here. And in the last video, I shot this image. This is a panorama of a beautiful snowy mountain range with some ice and some spruce trees, and I really like the image. But in that video, I dedicated a large portion of time to talking about the creation of this image and also giving some tips on panorama photography. So in this video, as I delve deeper into that, not only am I going to show you how I edited this image and put the whole thing together, don't worry, it's very fast, it's very simple, it doesn't go on for that long. I want to discuss the question of why pano. Why would you shoot a panoramic or a panorama? Panoramic. Panorama. I don't know. Well, one of the obvious answers to that question is that when a landscape suits itself to that format, so a beautiful mountain range illuminated by the first light of sunrise, that is a classic panorama composition. Another one might be a beautifully uniformed woodland backlit by the rising sun in the middle of autumn. But I think more importantly is, by shooting panoramas, it kind of opens up your eye, opens up that creativity. When I was in Canada, I was with another photographer in our group. He was called Brent, and he pretty much exclusively shoots panos. He's got the full nodal rail rig, and it's very impressive, his setup. But he sees the world in pano vision. So there were times when we were stood at a location and I didn't see a composition. But Brent is getting excited and he's seeing this panorama sort of unfold in front of him. And I think to have that eye is definitely a fantastic asset in any photographer's bag, if you like. Now, you don't need any special hardware to shoot panos. Yes, you can get the full panoramic head and the nodal rail, and that's certainly a great asset to have. But for me personally, I don't do any of that. All I have is my tripod head and my L bracket, and that is fine. I've never ever had a problem where my image wouldn't stitch because there was some shift in perspective caused by it rotating from the camera body and not the nodal point. So I just don't need the extra expense, the extra weight and the extra faff. However, if that problem ever occurs in the field, then no doubt I will invest in a nodal rail, and going forward into 2019 I want to shoot more panos. So I think it's great. I think by going out and trying to shoot panos and having that pano vision, I think you can open up locations that you otherwise may feel like you have exploited to death, that you have shot to death. And I think it's just a fantastic way of expressing your creativity, going out and trying exclusively to shoot panos. And yeah, this is one of my images, and I'm going to discuss this in more detail. Another reason as to why I shoot panos is the massive file sizes. This image is 15,000 pixels by 5,295, and what that means is you can see every single detail. The image clarity and the image quality is phenomenal. And should you ever go to print your panos, which I highly recommend you do because nothing looks better in large print than a pano. If you do choose to print, you are going to see every single detail. So that's another reason to shoot panos. So this pano and most, if not all, of my other panos are 6:17 ratio. Now the main reason for this is because I want consistency across the board, so I want them all to be the same. The reason 6:17, I was probably influenced by the old film cameras, the old panoramics that were all 6:17. It seems like a natural ratio, just like 4:5 or 8:10 is a natural ratio. And I think you should start as you mean to go on. So if you haven't shot panos before and you're considering trying it, I would definitely keep the 6:17 ratio in mind, so that as you go on and shoot more and more, they're all the same. So I'm now going to go in and edit this image and show you exactly what I did. So I took this panoramic, I took it 3 times, generally just to be safe. The conditions weren't changing that much, but the set of images, or the group of images that I chose to edit, that's the first group. And here we have 7 photographs. Stitching a panorama is so incredibly simple. Select your group of images. Here I've got 7 images, and I'm going to go into Photo, Photo Merge, Panorama. Simple as that. Lightroom now creates a preview. Now I've got 3 projection things here. 3 projection modes: spherical, cylindrical, and perspective. So 50% of the time I use spherical, 50% of the time I use cylindrical, and I've never really used perspective. Spherical and cylindrical, I see very, very little difference between the two. Perspective is more for architectural photography, so what that will do is it will stitch your images as if they're on a flat table, and in theory that should keep your edges perfectly straight and everything nice and vertical. Your vertical's vertical. I find most of the time spherical does a fantastic job. Now look at the white edges on the edge of this panorama here. That's what I'm talking about. When you level your tripod, the less level or the more wonky your tripod is, the more of that kind of white area you're going to have. And that's why I always say envisage your panorama and then shoot a bit wider than you need to, so you've got that room to crop out those white edges and crop into your panorama. And what you can do is, if you mess that up and your tripod's wonky and you've got these huge white spaces top and bottom of your image and you didn't leave enough breathing space, you can use the boundary warp slider. And what that does is essentially it stretches and warps your image to fill those corners. But I don't like using that at all. That's why I shoot wider than I need to, so I can crop in. So Lightroom has now produced this ginormous raw file for me to work on, which is fantastic. Bear in mind that before I did nothing to the images other than select them and merge to Panorama. So we're now going to go in and edit this file. The first thing I'm going to do is apply my 6x17 crop. This is a custom crop which I've entered myself and it's saved in Lightroom. So there we go. So this is not going to be the final image. Now remember, when I was on location I said that you want to shoot wider than you need to. You need to envisage your panorama. Well, I did not envisage my panorama starting at this kind of cut off messy group of trees on the right hand side. You see this gap just here? Between this tree and this fallen tree, that is where I want my panoramic to start. I want a nice clean border with room to breathe. The image, the subject, the elements within the frame need room to breathe. Now also the sky was fantastic, so I want to bring in more of the sky, putting the mountain range on the top third of the image, just like that. And looking at this, I would say that I want to chop off a bit of the left hand side. It really doesn't add much. I'll just cut it to about here where we see this final mountain ridge. So personally, I think the crop tool is the most powerful tool that you have at your disposal. You know, it can massively change the look and feel of an image. You know, you can remove distractions and you can really guide the viewer through the image, you know, from a square to a 4:5 to a 3:2 to a 6x17. The crop tool is very, very powerful, and the feel of an image is massively affected by the format of the image. Okay, I am happy with the ratio of this, and there is my file. Now what I'm going to do actually is just go in and have a quick look, because not always, but in the past, Lightroom can occasionally mess up the stitching and you can see some weird artifacts going on, but this looks clean as a whistle, so not a problem at all. So actually, I have to say the raw file looks really good. You know, the light really was perfect on this morning. But the shadows, they're very deep, and we have some hot spots on the mountains where the direct sunlight is hitting the snow. But if you look at my histogram, it's a great histogram. I've got the full range in, none of the highlights are clipping and none of the shadows are clipping. So that's great news. But what I want to do is bring down those highlights just on the mountains there, just to bring back a bit of detail and not make them such a distraction. And I'm going to lift the shadows so I can see the detail in the trees. There we go, and by doing that I've actually reduced the contrast of the image. So I'm going to introduce a little bit of contrast. Okay, so that's looking great. It's looking really good. Let me see, if I raise my blacks, it actually gives me a further detail in the trees, which is something I want, but I want to be careful. I don't want too much, you know, the shadows hold a lot of mystery, so I don't want it too much. I don't want it to be too flat and too HDR-esque. So things are looking pretty good. I'm going to increase the vibrancy here. Not too much. You have to be careful. If you overdo the vibrancy, you overcook it, it can look a bit sickly and a bit saturated. I just want to bring back some of that punch. You know, some of those blues in the ice and blues in the sky. Now, by increasing the vibrancy, that's massively affected. It's a very blue image. It's, you know, high key blue image. So the blue image has become even more blue. So what I'm actually going to do is just warm it up ever so slightly. Okay, I was just looking at my highlights. I'm just going to bring those back a little bit and instead just drop the exposure just marginally, just by a third, a quarter of a stop, something like that. This is looking good. It's looking good. It's looking contrasty. You can see the detail in the trees, but not too much detail. You've got the highlights, not too overpowering. You've got detail in the sky. And what I love about a panoramic is you can just, when you print a panoramic, when you shoot a panoramic, when you first look at it, you see the scene as a whole, and that's fantastic. But as you live with the image longer and longer, you start to see new things. Like, for example, I didn't notice this fallen tree when I was on location, when I was on site. I didn't see this, but now I look at the image and I think it's a wonderful detail within the image. Also, this open stretch of river here, the flowing water, is fantastic. It's a great little detail. The texture of the ice, the sort of the glossiness, the glass-like quality of the ice. That's something really nice. And these footprints here on the right hand side, those are the footprints of me, Gavin and Nick, probably Adam too, and they work in harmony with the images. Normally I would get rid of footprints, but in this case I'm leaving them because they're not too distracting, they're quite subtle, and they follow the shape of the riverbank and they help bring the viewer into the image along with that fallen tree. So, you know what, I'm going to leave the footprints. One thing I would like to do actually is bring out a bit more in that sky. I think when I was there I remember the sky being more stormy and more aggressive. So I'm going to drop on a graduated filter, which I didn't do in the field, but I'm going to do here in post in Lightroom. And let's try just less than half a stop and add a touch of clarity. I love adding clarity to skies and clouds. Let's have a look, see how this looks. So I'm just holding down Shift to make sure that I have a straight edge, a straight line here. And give it a nice feathered edge so it doesn't affect the trees too much. I don't want it to be too noticeable, everything's subtle. Yeah, there we go. All I've done there is I've increased the feathering of the filter just to make it less obvious. So everything's subtle, 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 subtlety, subtlety, subtlety. That's my message here. And I would say overall the image is looking about done. Perhaps it's a tad underexposed. So what I've done there is I've just increased the whites to bring back and lift all of the white snow. It shouldn't affect the highlights too much, but it's just gonna bring up the foreground and the snow, giving the illusion of overall exposure. Whereas in fact that won't have affected the shadows and the trees, which I think are spot on. So this image feels about done. A couple of quick things that I'd like to do. One is sharpening. Sharpening defaults to 40, that's fine, but I don't need sharpening in the sky, I don't need sharpening in the snow. All that's going to do is add noise, so I'm going to use the masking slider. I'm going to hold down Option on my Mac, which will show me now where the sharpening is being applied. White areas have sharpening applied, black areas do not. So the white areas are the areas with detail, So that to me looks about right. And actually using this tool, if you look in the middle of the screen, you see that white dot? That is some kind of dirt or maybe a bird or something. So I couldn't see that before, but with the masking tool I can see it. So I am going to get rid of that. And actually what that's prompted me to do is to visualize my spots. So you often get quite a lot of hidden dirt on your sensor and in your images that you can't necessarily see when looking at a screen, but if you were to print it or something like that, then you can see it. But if you just click the healing tool in Lightroom and then go to the bottom, you can see here visualize spots. And it essentially does what I've just done with the masking tool. And there is, well, I can't see any. God. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I've never cleaned my sensor. And it is clean as a whistle. So that was the only one spot I had to worry about. But that's a nice little tip for you. If you're concerned about a dirty sensor, use the Visualize Spots tool. It's fantastic. Right, we're getting there. We're getting there now. There's one more thing I'm going to do, and that is apply a vignette. I think the vignette is, if done subtly, is going to just pull the eye into the frame, into the scene, along with the footprints, the leaning trees and the ridge on the left hand side. Everything's pulling you into the center of the image. The vignette is going to do that as well. Now it's just got to be subtle. You don't want to actually be able to see the vignette. You know, you just want to darken those corners. Just a little, yeah. Okay, I think we're done. I think we're done. Yeah, there you go. That's this week's video. Hopefully this has encouraged you to go out and try and shoot some panoramics. You really should do, because you will be impressed by the image quality, the size of the file, and how it can change the look and feel of a location that may be familiar to you. So I definitely encourage you to go out and try it. Just make sure that your tripod is level. So thank you so much for watching, and join me next week as join me on Wednesday as I shoot more wintry, beautiful woodland scenes in Canada. And I might be going out on a limb here, I might be, but I think the image in my next video on Wednesday is my best from the trip. Maybe. You can be the judge of that. So tune in then. But thank you so much for watching, and bye for now. The composition I'm shooting, I'm so happy with. It's just wonderful. Nick Page can't drive, and he crashed his car straight into the back of me and Gavin. Lake Minnewanka, it's just not quite doing it for me.